Today, he's going to be talking to us about popular music-based composition starters for your classroom. Please welcome Matt Warren.
Thank you. As John said, my name is Matt Warren. I teach in Webster, New York, which is about, 20 minutes east of here. I teach 8th grade general music in addition to the courses that I do. And our entire 8th grade general music curriculum is structured as a history of American popular music, from folk music all the way through more contemporary topics. I think the last thing we touch on is something like American Idol and reality TV shows for music or something like that. That's the last thing we talk about. But our students create, perform, and respond using these pop music starting points in a comprehensive musicianship model. And basically that means when we're studying disco music, we're performing disco music and we're writing in disco music style, and all this, everything kind of works together. So even students that aren't great at one of those things can still do well at something else. And so this is just one of the strands that we're doing at the same time we're performing, responding, listening, analyzing, all of those big words. Our students are required to take music for all 3 years of middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. They meet once every 3 school days for 1 hour, so about 60 hours a school year. The way we've convinced our administration that is the best thing for them is that you can put them in an hour-long study hall and have a bunch of behavioral problems, or you can put them in a class and have them learn something. So if you're thinking about maybe your middle school in your school district and why they might only have, say, 10 weeks of general music at the 7th and 8th grade level, or 20 weeks, that's what we've convinced our administration is the best for them in a lot of different ways. So why compose using popular music? And let me just be clear, most of the stuff we're going to talk about today is historical popular music. And while for some of us that is very much a native language to us, for our students, anything before like Eminem is really old. Nirvana is super old. They know Dave Grohl from maybe like the Muppets movie. If you've seen him, he has a cameo. He plays Animal in the Muppets movie. But they know him from Foo Fighters and things like that. They don't remember that he was in a band called Nirvana back in the 90s. And so why are we going to do this? Well, some of it has to do with the fact that it's a more native language for our kids, and it's a little bit more natural for them to compose using these starters. Other parts of it is just, well, I think it fits really well over teaching compositional skills. Students want to create their own music, and if you look at the brand new music standards that I talked about here last year as they were just kind of being premiered and rolled out, one of the 3 columns we have here is creating. So creating, composing, whether it's using standard notation or not, performing and responding are all very important. But giving kids the ability to do it for the rest of their lives is something different. If we're so focused on, well, make sure this quarter note goes where it's supposed to go, I don't know if that's necessarily where our students are going to be composing 5 years from now, or creating is probably the better word. That's why I like what they used on the new standards. Much of what we do in ensemble music is recreating. We're recreating this chorus from Brahms' Lullaby, or from Brahms' Requiem. We're recreating what the composer originally wanted. And so this gives kids the ability to create and actually make something brand new. And it's an easier transition because they're a little bit more familiar with popular music than they are with, say, Mozart. Now, I just talked about the difference between composing and creating, and it's something that really needs to come into play here as well. I use standard notation for some of my compositions, and I don't use standard notation for other ones. The first 2 compositions assignments my students do use standard notation because they have a good background in it from 6th and 7th grade, and I just continue it into 8th grade. But I also feel it's important for my students to be able to read standard notation, even if it's a cheat sheet with just the melody written out and guitar chords over it, or keyboard chords, or whatever you want to call it. So I like to have them compose in standard notation for that reason, to show how stuff lines up or is supposed to line up. But I don't think that notation is the most important thing. And when we get to something like GarageBand or Soundation a little bit later in our presentation here, you'll see why, I hope. The very first composition my students do, and it's the second day of class, is a folk music composition. We take the tune from Tom Dooley, and they write new lyrics over the top of it to tell me something they did over the summer. Okay, it's really, really basic. But it serves a lot of different purposes. It shows them how to line up syllables with rhythm. It teaches them how to use poetic language and fit stuff into a certain amount of space too. If you put it together and write a common refrain as a class, like this is what I did last summer, whatever it is, on Tom Dooley, you can use different student verses and create a whole song and show them about form and repetition as well. You also get to learn a little bit about what the students did over summer vacation. And we use Danielson over in Webster for our teacher evaluation system. And I used this to demonstrate my knowledge of students at my year-end evaluation this year. See, I asked my kids what they do. So, yeah. It reinforces writing lyrics over an existing melody, something that was very common in the time frame. Another thing that I show my kids at the end of the year is a national anthem video. And they talk about how Yankee Doodle was used extensively and people would write new lyrics over the top of it. So that's a pretty important thing. So my students get this neat little, let's see if I can zoom out here. It's just the melody for Tom Dooley. They write their new lyrics underneath it after they brainstorm on the front side. I don't know why it flipped, but it did. And so then this isn't just an example that I show my kids. Here is my cool example. It is the very best. If you can make your try better than all of the rest, or see if you can. Sorry, I missed the one note. So I show them how to line up lyrics, use hyphens to split up multisyllabic words, and all that stuff to kind of help them go through. And this was Ashley Bonafides. It says, I took a trip to Las Vegas, and see, it doesn't fit exactly the melody, so we had to actually change the rhythm, and I was able to go through that with her and differentiate a little bit here with eighth notes and 2 quarter notes instead of a half note and a quarter note right there. And then here we had an extra one, so we just crossed it off because the music was already written on the page to kind of help them line it up. Excuse me. My blues composition is the second one that we do, and that first one isn't exactly musical. They're talking about lining up with lyrics and things like that, but they're not actually writing brand new music. But by the time we get to this unit in mid to late October, my students have been playing 1-4-5 chord progressions on the baritone ukulele and keyboard. Let me just back up a little bit. They've had extensive training in the keyboard. My colleague, Dr. Lon Beery in Webster, spends a lot of time going over the keyboard inversions with the kids. And then they play the baritone ukulele a little bit as well. By the time we get through 8th grade, they're playing the guitar, but we use the baritone ukulele as kind of an introductory instrument. It has 4 strings. They're the same 4 strings as the bottom 4 strings of the guitar, so it helps the students transition a little bit easier. At the beginning of 8th grade, because we have students coming in from multiple entry points, whether they're coming from band, chorus, orchestra, or are brand new to our district, I review those baritone ukulele chords for a good month before we start to transition into the guitar. This composition assignment reinforces that 1-4 and 5-7 chord progression. They're composing using chord tones only in the blues scale. It gives them a chance to use their personal choice and creativity and reviews lining up the lyrics with the rhythm. And so they're writing their they're writing their lyrics first. There's no right way to teach writing songs, by the way. If you want to do lyrics first, you can. If you want to do music first, you can. If you want to do them at the same time, you can. I find when I'm teaching 25 people, it's best to focus on one or the other, but that's me. So we use The Thrill Is Gone as kind of an example, and then they choose their rhythms and match it with their lyrics before they go on to actually writing it on the page, and that's only page 1. So we use the blues tetrachords, and all of this stuff is available on my website, which I'll give you at the end. I've got a complete blues unit plan that shows the comprehensive musicianship stuff that they're doing, the performing, responding, and composing all at the same time. And here's one example from this year. Most of my students write kind of basic lyrics. I hate homework, I don't like school, things like that. it's a lot of little brother stuff. I don't like my little brother, but so I hate homework. I hate it with all my heart. Then he repeats the same line of text, but uses the same kind of pattern with the different chord tones. And then here, same thing at the end. He closes off his concept. I hope I never have to do it again so I can go play darts. It's a very, very deep blues composition by Ben Coates. I have had very deep ones. I had a student who lost a mother who wrote about that. I had a student who wrote about September 11th. Most of my kids write stuff like this. The brother. You've insulted me for the last time. You've insulted me for the last time. I'll get you back. I won't be very kind. So it works, and then we'll play them. And I've had students record them in the past. I don't get to the recording piece yet in most of my classes, so I haven't had very many recordings of that. Excuse me. Moving into the 1950s, and I like some of these I've done, some of these I would love to do if I had more time. One of the things that I would love to do are take the folk music composition and their blues compositions and kind of 1950s them up, whether you're talking about rockabilly or rhythm and blues. And a lot of those hits were up-tempo covers of traditional country and western songs or blues songs. Elvis's first two singles, one was a hillbilly song, one was a blues song. And a lot of his records were old blues songs that he just brought to the wider audience. So after playing Good Golly Miss Molly, or listening and playing Good Golly Miss Molly and or Tutti Frutti from Little Richard, we take a student's blues composition and up-tempo it, add a drum beat behind it, and boom, you have your rhythm and blues song. Okay, it doesn't take a whole lot, and they can do it whether you're talking about using Soundation loops, GarageBand loops, or getting together and actually performing it using authentic or digital instruments. You can do a similar thing after listening to Blue Moon of Kentucky and then comparing Bill Monroe's version to Elvis Presley's version. Okay, Blue Moon of Kentucky isn't in the AAB rhythm and blues style, or blues style, but Elvis Presley rearranged it that way, and that was his first single. And so if you talk about that and take your folk composition and change it stylistically, you can have another rockabilly composition fairly easily, and it reinforces those concepts that you're talking about in your history analysis. I actually crowdsourced this one in, I guess it was December or January. I put it out on one of the Facebook groups, and I was like, what can I do for the early 1960s composition? And I think it was Barbara Friedman from up in Hartford, Connecticut, told me to use the 50s chord progression, okay, the doo-wop chord progression, to take my chordal harmony compositions to the next level. So instead of just having a 1 chord, a 4 chord, and a 5/7 chord, we had a 6 chord, and students are still using chord tones to compose. But then down here, I think this would be a very good time to add passing tones if you haven't yet in your compositions. And you can talk about the opening of Stand By Me, which uses a lot of non-chord tones and passing tones and things like that, but still fits that progression. It allows students to continue adding difficulty to their songs, but still provides them a very structured framework, going from something that's very, very structured, like that folk music composition, and continuing to build until students are just like, here's a blank piece of paper, go compose something. You have to, it's that, the scaffolding, and you keep removing the scaffolding as the school year goes on. Give them a little bit more to work with, a little bit more to work with. Sorry, go to full screen. My loop-based disco composition is always one that I never know what my students are going to end up with. I've done it a few different ways. I've done it with an old online free software called Music Lab. When that got taken off the internet, I used Beat Lab this past year, and I had my students do very, very short compositions that were designed to show a mood, whether it was like energetic or sad or scary. They chose a mood and created different compositions in the around their 1970s concepts. but they can make their own techno disco compositions using Soundation for Music First or GarageBand on iOS devices. Excuse me. And you could talk about film music and program music as well. The fundamentals of the disco music, the steady danceable beat, bass line, and synthetic instruments are all part of this composition. So I have students go in, and this composition assignment takes a little bit longer. Students come in and they choose the bass groove that they really like. And we talk a lot about bass groove in the 1970s, as you'll see from the next composition we'll get to. They pick their bass line, then they add a drum part, whether they're recording it themselves using GarageBand or just using a loop from Soundation or GarageBand. Then on top of it, they find some sort of synthetic instrument to use as, again, reinforcing some of the concepts from the disco era. It's got to be, this type of bass line, this type of drum line to make it easier to dance to, just like the disco music, even though disco sucks. Bad joke, sorry. The 70s bassline improvisation is a brand new composition assignment I added to my repertoire this year. And it actually came from Richard McCready, who you're going to see later today if his flight gets in. He was delayed down in Maryland this morning. But it came in the Music First newsletter. And if you don't follow Music First, whether it's with their newsletter or on Twitter, Facebook, things like that, you definitely should check them out. They have a whole suite of online web-based composition, music theory, all those kind of tools. What's nice is you can get a subscription and then use it from any Windows-based computer, Windows or Chrome-based computer. Last I knew, they weren't set up with the iOS devices just yet, but they were in the process of that, but that was last summer. I don't know. But that's a good resource for you to use if you would like. After my students spent some time listening to some grooving 70s bass lines and identified key components, we created our own. So we analyzed bass lines, then we created it, then we responded to it. They presented theirs to each other. I mean, it goes right down this whole thing, the brand new standards. So they thought about what they wanted to do, they planned it, they developed their own musical ideas for it. They evaluated both each other and themselves. They refined it, and then they presented it to their peers. But we did it as an improvisation, not as a composition, which is what the Music First folks did using Soundation. I created a 4-measure drum loop, played it over my classroom speakers. You'll hear that in a second. It got really annoying after hearing it for like 4 hours. Students were given 20 minutes on the keyboard with headphones to put some tools in their toolbox. What sounded good, what sounded bad, what don't I ever want to do again, things like that. So this is the group practice, and I apparently need to get way better at filming stuff using the landscape as opposed to the portrait. This is my drum loop. You can't hear any of them because they have their headphones on as they're practicing. They can hear the bass of the drum beat, but they can't hear each other yet. And then we went around and each kid played it in front of the entire class. It was an improvisation. This is one. This is Julene, who had a frustrating ear, but she did this okay. She didn't think hers was very good. It was one of the only ones that was able to keep a steady beat and actually made some sort of sense. But that was the first. That was our first iteration. I didn't videotape the next class, but that was our first go around, and we went entirely around the class. Kids wrote down, and it's right in this lesson, so I should probably click it and show it to you. So these are the examples we used. I Want You Back from the Jackson 5, Chic Good Times, and the Rapper's Delight, which is our bridge to the 1980s unit. We talk about rap. Yeah, Ben.
Really quick, I'm sorry.
Let's go ahead.
Clarify. Are these kids are from also kids who are in band course and orchestra are not exempted?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, they're not in general music. They
They're
are exempted. They're forced out of general music, in fact.
Yeah, so
Our kids can't even take band and chorus.
Right.
So let alone adding the general music in there.
So all the kids that are in your classes are
Non-performing. Well,
non-performing.
yeah. I have a lot of boys in there because they don't think they can sing, And I have girls in there that don't want to sing because chorus is way easier and has less homework and classwork. So the counselors have a tendency to steer them away from the general music classroom because their grade will end up better, which is how we should be forming our classes. Anyway,
Okay.
it's a good question. Thank you very much. So I go through, and Soundation, there's free applications with Soundation as well, and that's what I used. I didn't buy anything. I know that Ben here at Fairport uses some Soundation stuff with his kids. But then they evaluated their performance. What was one thing I really liked about my groove? What was one thing I wish I had done differently? And then when they were listening to other folks, one thing you liked, one constructive suggestion. And when you do that 20 times, you get a much better understanding of what you like hearing and what you don't like hearing. And so the next time when they came back and they refined what they were doing, it led them to perform a little bit better. They were on the beat. They didn't jump all over the keyboard because a lot of lines don't do that. So they were able to, let me return to full screen. So they reflected in what they wanted to change. And then after they practiced again the next class, the students perform a brand new improvisation and hopefully alter their lines based on their reflection. And a lot of the students did. Now some students composed something. They didn't improvise. They played the same thing for 20 minutes and then they played it out loud. And that's okay. It's not what we're going for. We were going for an improvisation. But they were still composing, using a popular music starter, and performing on the keyboard all at the same time, which is pretty cool, I think. My rap composition that I'm going to talk about today comes from a brand new book by Robert. Can you say his last name for me? Vaji. Robert Vaji, who went to Arizona State, where Evan taught, which we'll talk about here in a second. But it's called Fresh Beats, and it just came out last year, 2013. It's a standards-based hip-hop curriculum. And so there's some really neat stuff in here, but there's about 4 composition assignments in the back of this book. Song for a social change, so like about drugs or violence or something like that. Song model response, introductory songs, so the students introduce themselves, and all these other different things. One of the things I like about rapping is it gives my students a chance to perform, but they don't have to sing. And a lot of the kids in my class are there because they hate singing, or they think they're bad at it, or they don't want to do it, or they get super self-conscious, or for whatever reason, as we just explained. I've had varying levels of success with singing in general music. My folk music composition, I had my students record it. I had one of my classes that was a little bit ahead of the other ones record it this year. And I got a lot of pushback from the girls in the class, not the boys. The boys are just like, yeah, whatever, I'll do it. The girls, I didn't want to sing, that's why I'm not in chorus. Okay, I get it, but nobody's going to hear this ever except for me. So rapping allows you to still do those compositions, focusing on rhythm, meter, and then in addition to that, form. That's one of the things he breaks down very well in there is the form, not just verse and chorus and bridge and things like that, but inside verses, phrase by phrase. It's really nice. But it allows you to teach rhythm, meter, form, and lyrics and all this other stuff without having that singing component to it, the singing aspect. Contemporary composition starters are a little bit more difficult for me anyway, because they change so frequently. If you want to talk to kids about music that they're listening to, you have to listen to the music that the kids are listening to all of the time, and then do your best to figure out some part of that you want to take out and do compositions with. For that reason, most of what I do with contemporary music, stuff that's out right now on the radio, is listening, analyzing, and performing. Not so much the composing aspect. So what we're going to talk about here is, I just finished up a digital music camp in Webster. And for 4 days, the week before the 4th of July there, a couple weeks ago, for 2 hours, I had kids come in and they paid and all this other stuff. And we used the school iPads to learn GarageBand. We played all the instruments. We learned how to record, edit, all this other stuff. But one of the compositions we did, the recreations we did, was we made an 8-measure chunk of Katy Perry's Roar. And then we listened to that song and counted, I think it's played something like 24 times from beginning to end, that 8-measure chunk. And then it goes into like the verses, which is slightly different, but it's still based on the same thing. And so we talked about form and how phrases repeat to form big sections like verses and choruses, and then how those big sections repeat and things like that. And so what we ended up doing was going in at the end of the week, and they created their own composition. Again, that scaffolding thing. Here, create something you've already heard. Now create something from nothing eventually. So students created 2 8-measure sections, 2, 3, some of them created more than that. It was all up to them. They had a finite amount of time and they got to use it how they wanted to. And then they duplicated and arranged those sections into a complete song like we did with Katy Perry's Roar. So this is Sam DeZutter. She was in 6th grade, general music this year. And so she created these. These are all big chunks. So this is 4 measures. This is another 4 measures. And she liked to repeat what was going on. So this is Sammy DeZutter's composition. Whoa! Hey, that was loud. Oops. So right now we're here. If it's blue, it's a loop that was in GarageBand. If it's green, she composed it. And that section repeats. My wife said this sounded creepy.
Which part is the green part?
The green part is stuff she composed.
No.
Oh, it's the drum part. It's a drum. I think it's a drum. And then there's this guitar part that you can barely hear. So we had 45 minutes or something for her to create that, so that's what she did. Form, structure, there was melodic elements that are in there. Of course, using loops, sometimes that gets a little bit lost in the shuffle. And if she had had more time, I would love to have seen her go in and do a little bit more, I don't know, melodic drive or something that maybe changes a little bit more. But we were under some time constraints, and so that's why we didn't go through any more of that. So, part of our sessions here today, you're going to see folks do about 30, 35 minutes worth of, I don't know, presentation for lack of a better word, and then about 10, 15 minutes of questions. So you can ask questions about what you saw today. What questions do you folks have? Yeah?
That last composition, was that on Garage?
Yeah, that was entirely GarageBand.
Where did the vocal piece?
Those were loops.
Those are
Yeah, they're in the loops library. Yeah, there's not a lot of them. It's the general ooh and wah stuff, but yeah, they're in there. Yeah.
When you teach 1, 4, 5 chords, so they've done that in 6th and 7th grade. They've
Right.
been introduced to that
Mhm.
concept, and they played like C, F, and G on the piano.
Yeah, they play it in the inversions.
Okay.
They don't jump around the keyboard. When we do our blues improvisation, I'll have my kids do a blues improvisation that I probably should have put on there, but I didn't. Oh well. They jump with the right hand, but they won't do it with the left hand.
Right. And so when you introduce that concept, you own on the piano. They play the chords on the baritone, they play it on the piano, and you teach them like, well, we call this the 1 chord because C is the lowest note and it's the first note in the scale. Or do you go that far?
When I taught 6th grade general music and we were introducing those concepts, I did that. Okay, so we block them out like this, and they're built on the 1st scale degree, the 4th scale degree, and the 5th scale degree. But then we rearrange them to kind of make it a little bit easier to play. I don't teach that now. I know that Dr. Beery does that, but when I did it, that's what I taught, yeah.
Okay.
I don't really talk about it in 8th grade.
Yeah. So, but they have that background information, and they sort of use that as a taking off point for the blues.
I hope so.
Okay.
But yeah, and when we do the compositions, I show them actually, let's see if I have that. Let's see if I have that full blues composition up here. I don't. Okay. I got other stuff on there. So I wish I had that, but I don't. Life's hard. Where'd that go? Oh. Go back to there. Any other questions for me? Stuff you want to learn about, stuff you want to know how I get it done.
So the 8th graders aren't in band, orchestra, or chorus. Are any of the other grade levels in general music?
In 6th grade, we have a handful of kids that are in both general music and one of the performing ensembles. In 7th and 8th grade, they're not. In 7th and 8th grade, they only have one slot for a music class. But in 6th grade, they have 2 slots. So I have a lot of my 6th graders in chorus and band or chorus and orchestra, but only a handful are in general music and something else. It's unfortunate, but we get 3 years with them, and that's the trade-off.
Will somebody be talking today about what is Spotify or Edmodo?
Edmodo, I'll do that briefly. Edmodo is a platform for students to both share with the teacher and share with each other. And so for me, I created different groups based on my classes, and then the students come in and I'll just one post to approve. Oh, good. So they did their reflections at the end of each day on an MP3 recorder and uploaded them to Edmodo. What this does for me is it combines everything in one place where I can access it anywhere. Our servers at school are kind of discombobulated. We're trying to find where students are saving stuff and things like that. So if I have them just upload it to here, I can go right in and actually listen to the compositions. I played Sam's composition right in Edmodo because it was an MP3 file she uploaded. So their versions of Roar, they uploaded those. They uploaded all of their reflections from each day right onto here. So it's a platform for either you to give notes to your students or to receive notes from them. They can also comment on each other's if you want to set it up that way. I know Brian Franco, who presented here last year, does a lot of the peer reviews on that website as opposed to in class and things like that. I'm not a huge fan of peer reviews teaching middle school. He teaches high school, it's different. So Spotify, I use every single day in my classroom. Spotify is an online library of thousands, millions of songs, MP3s. Well, I don't know how they play it. It doesn't really matter. They stream it right over your internet connection. Now, every school is a little bit different. Some schools won't let you stream music over their internet connection because it's so valuable that pop music shouldn't be played on there. But it allows you to go in and play full albums, play individual songs. There's only a few notable examples of stuff that's not on Spotify, like the Beatles. They don't like their music being played that way, I guess. So, but I use it every single day. Go download it. It's the greatest thing ever. Or you can play it online. Yeah.
Do you use the premium service?
I don't.
You don't, okay.
I'm cheap, sorry. Yeah.
You don't use premium, but I was going to ask if the schools provided the cost for the
I'm sure they would if I made the case for it. Because popular music is our 8th grade general music curriculum, I'd be like, hey, we need this. And they'd be like, all right, I guess you can make that point. And it would probably be able to come out of our textbook money. Interesting. Okay. All right. Anything else? Yeah, Michael.
Do you have students who are in band or choir, but then hear about what you're doing in this class and then drop and join your course?
I don't think so. I haven't had anyone ever tell me that. Especially the band and orchestra piece, like their parents are invested in the instrument, so it's a little bit harder for them to drop that class before they get their credit, their high school credit for it. I've had students be moved into my class and do much better because they couldn't participate in chorus without being knuckleheads. And it appeals to them a little bit more than being in chorus. But I don't think I've had anyone be like, I'm not going to be in chorus, I'm going to be in general music because of that awesome pop music thing. Maybe one kid in 5 years or 6 years. I remember one. Okay. All right, well, we're going to change over here to our next presenter. Give us a few moments. There's coffee, bagels, all that stuff next door, and there's water right outside. Thanks, guys.